You're listening to the Poo Podcast. My name is Dosta. Here we discuss all things poo. Please do subscribe and comment. Just a note to say, this episode does contain swearing. And now I present to you episode number 4 from season 1 on the Poo Podcast. So just a note before I start that this episode does contain swearing. So if you're not into that, you can click on some of the other episodes. Otherwise, buckle yourself in for another episode of the Poo Podcast. So, I guess the job of the comedian is to make people laugh, right? And when I consider that, I reckon it sounds like a shit job. It really does sound like a shit job. It sounds like the sort of job where you have to give a shit and yet look as though you don't give a shit. And I thought, well, when I think about this, it's like, well, wouldn't you want a job where you don't have to give a shit and you don't have to look like you give a shit? And of course, well, there must be a number of jobs in that category, right? So many jobs where it's understandable that you don't give a shit and nobody really expects you to because of the job that it is. And this gets me thinking, it's really funny, this phrase, giving a shit and taking shit. Because when you take shit from someone, it's like, well, they're making your day difficult. They're putting you down, right? If you say, I don't take shit from anyone, it's like, well, you won't put up with them messing with your business or messing with your work or attacking you even personally, right? If someone gives you shit, it's a personal attack in so many ways. And yet the other side of this, what's the opposite of like giving a shit, right? Taking shit is when someone's trying to make your day worse, but giving a shit is when you give a shit. If you give a shit, then, well, you actually care, right? I give a shit. I give a shit about you. That means I care. That means I want to help you. It means I am engaged in your dilemma. I'm engaged in your problem. And this is just sort of those funny little plays with words, isn't it? I mean, giving a shit, taking shit, and any number of other variations on, well, these different meanings of the word shit. And this reminds me of a story, actually, a terrible story in some ways, from when I was traveling in South America with my friends. This was many years ago. So we were traveling around South America as young would-be travelers, explorers. And my friend decided, well, we're going to go from one end to the other, and the cheapest way to do that is by bus. And she booked the bus tickets for us and organized it. And basically from one end of South America to the other, it was a 3-day bus ride. And I said, well, how long was it going to take by flight? And she said, well, it would have taken 3 hours by plane. So I thought, okay, well, 3 hours, 3 days. I guess that's the standard ratio, right? And I asked her, well, how much money did we save? And she said, well, the difference was about $20. And I thought, well, $20, that's actually pretty good, because in South America, $20 can go a long way. $20 might be 4 days accommodation. It might be 4 very big meals. It might be 2 or 3 nights of big drinking, right? So, well, $20 savings, that seems pretty good. And for the price of the ticket, well, we thought we'll be on the bus for a couple of days, so that means we won't have food or accommodation to worry about. But as it turned out, this particular bus company didn't provide food, which meant that we were hungry for the whole 3 days. And another thing is that they didn't provide toilet paper, which meant that the on-bus toilet was one that you didn't want to frequent very often. And, of course, well, when you're not eating, you don't poo that much. So we came to the end of the bus ride, and it happened, as it does, in the most awkward way possible. I needed to poo. And I knew that this was going to be a particularly bad poo because it had been brewing for 2 days, 3 days. And it had been in there for a very long time because I hadn't eaten anything for 3 days, which meant that whatever was going to come out was going to be something that was well and truly fermented long past its use-by date. And we were so close to the end of the ride that I thought, well, I'll just hold on and go into the bus terminal and do my poo there because the on-bus toilet is going to be hell at this stage, right at the end of 3 days. So I did. I held on, and then I quickly got my stuff and went off the bus and ran away from my friends and found the bus terminal toilets. And I sort of hurried in, and I saw the janitor there. And I thought to myself, well, I wonder if that's a job where you have to give a shit. And I sort of giggled to myself, and then I thought, even better. I wonder if that's a job where people give him shit. And I sort of think, well, it is a shit job, isn't it? And beyond all that, I was in quite a hurry, so I find the first cubicle, which does have a sign on the door, which I didn't notice at the time. I barge my way in, close the door, pull down my pants, and oh my holy mother of Mary, the shit that came out was the worst poo of my entire life. I mean, this one takes first place. This one is the crown jewels of the worst shits ever. And I knew it just because, well, I mean, it makes sense, right? It's been brewing for 3 days. And as I'm halfway through this, I start to hear the janitor sort of knocking on my door and sort of pushing his way in. And the door, it doesn't entirely lock properly. So I'm sort of pushing on the door, trying to hold it shut while I'm trying to get this poo out. And I'm thinking, what on earth could he want? Why is he doing this? And of course, I don't understand him because this is South America. I didn't speak a single word of Spanish at the time. And I think, man, if I could just finish this and get out, then everything will be fine. So I finish my poo, I wipe my ass, and I stand up, pull up my pants, and I turn around and I press the flush button on the toilet. And as I pressed the toilet flush button, the door came open and the janitor was standing there. And I knew immediately what he had been saying and what the sign on the door said. Out of order. And the shit that I had been brewing for 3 days spilled up, over, and out of the toilet bowl and all over the floor and stunk out the entire cubicle. And the look on his face was just of complete devastation. And of course, I couldn't even say sorry. I couldn't even say I didn't know. I couldn't explain anything because he only spoke Spanish. So what I did was I reached into my pocket, pulled out my wallet, and I found that I had a $20 note. And I gave that to him as a tip. And that is because, well, I give a shit. Thanks very much for tuning in. that will be enough for this episode. You've been listening to the Poo Podcast. If you do have a poo story of your own, please leave it in the comments for your chance to win as a feature. Thanks very much. We'll be back soon with more. This has been the Poo Podcast. Bye for now.